Why should I kneel? Ebony Hayes demanded, her voice steady and defiant, as Hannah Sinclair's hand flew through the air in a sharp slap that echoed like a gunshot in the bridal suite. The bride's eyes blazed with rage, her wedding gown shimmering mockingly as she shrieked, "How dare you disrespect me on my day?" But Ebony stood tall, her cheek burning yet unbroken, refusing to bow to the cruelty rooted in entitlement and prejudice. This explosive confrontation, fueled by years of silent endurance and a single act of rebellion, sets the stage for a wedding that unravels into scandal. Will Ebony's courage shatter a dynasty, or will it cost her everything? As the groom steps in with unexpected fury, defending the maid over his fiancée, secrets and alliances fracture in ways no one saw coming. Hey listeners, hit that subscribe button to catch our latest stories of resilience and justice, and drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from, and what's your prediction? Does the groom walk away, or does pride prevail? Stick around. You won't believe how this tale of dignity and defiance unfolds, revealing truths that could change lives forever. The air in the Sinclair mansion hung thick with the scent of fresh lilies and polished marble, a veneer of opulence that barely masked the undercurrents of tension swirling through its grand halls. Ebony Hayes, a 32-year-old black maid with calloused hands forged from a decade of silent servitude, moved with deliberate grace, her feather duster whispering against the ornate vases lining the corridor. The Atlanta estate buzzed with the frantic energy of wedding preparations, florists hauling bouquets, caterers clattering trays, and distant piano notes drifting like fragile preludes to tomorrow's spectacle. But in this moment, the world narrowed to a single venomous command. "Get on your knees, Ebony!" Hannah Sinclair's voice sliced through the air like a whip crack, dripping with entitlement and disdain. The bride-to-be, a stunning white woman in her mid-20s with porcelain skin and golden hair pulled into a regal updo, stood in the doorway of the sunlit parlor, her turquoise dress clinging to her lithe frame like a second skin. Her blue eyes narrowed to slits, radiating a fury that seemed disproportionate to the minor infraction. "You stepped too close and dirtied my space. Beg for forgiveness now." Ebony froze, her heart pounding a defiant rhythm in her chest, a drumbeat of resistance echoing through her veins. The feather duster slipped slightly in her grip, but she steadied it, refusing to let the shock betray her composure. For 10 long years, she had endured the Sinclair family's slights, the pointed critiques from Victoria, Hannah's imperious mother, the casual dismissals from the household staff who mirrored their employer's prejudices. But this demand to kneel, to prostrate herself like some relic of a bygone era of subjugation, ignited a fire that had smoldered deep within her soul. "I work for you, not as your slave," Ebony replied, her voice low and unyielding, her dark eyes blazing with an unquenchable flame. No insult could douse that fire. It was the legacy of her ancestors' resilience, the echo of her mother's whispered wisdom in a cramped Atlanta kitchen years ago. "Don't let anyone trample your dignity, Ebony." In the shadows of the adjacent hallway, Thomas Whitaker, Hannah's white fiancé, observed the scene in silence, his jaw clenched tight beneath his chiseled features. A successful entrepreneur in his early 30s, with hazel eyes that usually sparkled with easy charm, Thomas had long excused Hannah's sharp edges as the quirks of privilege. He loved her, or thought he did, for the way she commanded rooms, the way her laughter lit up social gatherings among Atlanta's elite. But this time, his gaze lingered on Ebony, the stranger who stood tall amid the storm, her posture a testament to quiet strength. A spark of doubt flickered in his mind, unraveling the threads of their impending vows. Could this be the crack that toppled their carefully constructed future? Would Ebony's courage dismantle a dynasty built on wealth and whispers of superiority? Or would her pride exact a price too steep to pay? Ebony turned away from Hannah's glare, her shoes tapping softly on the marble floor as she resumed her duties, each step a quiet rebellion against the venom still ringing in her ears. She gathered armfuls of shimmering silk sashes, their delicate folds glistening under the chandelier's glow. A stark contrast to the rough, calloused skin of her hands, etched from years of scrubbing, polishing, and serving a family that viewed her as little more than an extension of their luxury. At 32, Ebony carried herself with a grace born of necessity, her ebony skin glowing faintly in the afternoon light, her sharp eyes harboring a fire that refused to dim. The memory of Hannah's command gnawed at her like a persistent thorn, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. These sashes were destined for the grand hall, where tomorrow's wedding would unfold in a whirlwind of extravagance, a spectacle of Atlanta's high society. She wove through the bustling workers, florists arranging cascades of roses, caterers balancing silver trays laden with delicacies, their chatter a low hum beneath the distant piano's melancholic melody. Reaching the hall where tables stood like vigilant sentinels awaiting adornment, Ebony draped each sash with meticulous precision, her fingers smoothing the fabric as if it could shield her from the family's disdain. She had heard Hannah's cutting voice before, laced with entitlement, but today's cruelty felt different, a public blade designed to humiliate. As she adjusted one final fold, her mind drifted to that cherished memory of her mother, spoken in their humble kitchen amid the aroma of simmering collard greens and cornbread. "Don't let anyone trample your dignity, Ebony." Those words were her anchor, holding her steady against the tide of degradation. Ebony had once dreamed of more, of designing interiors, crafting spaces that sang with beauty and warmth, where light danced off walls in harmonious patterns. But life had other plans, tethering her to this role with the chains of financial necessity. Her wages flowed straight to her younger sister's college fund, a sacrifice that kept her bound to the Sinclair's whims. Yet in this solitary moment, aligning the sashes with military exactness, Ebony felt a flicker of her old ambition reignite, a whisper insisting she was destined for greater things than being the family's invisible hand. "Ebony!" Hannah's voice pierced the hall once more, summoned as if by Ebony's defiant thoughts. The bride-to-be loomed in the doorway, her turquoise dress accentuating her poised stance, blonde hair bound like a crown of authority. Her blue eyes raked over Ebony, hunting for imperfections in the setup. "These sashes are uneven. Do you want my wedding to look like a thrift store sale?" The words lashed out like a whip, audible to all nearby workers. A florist glanced up briefly before averting her gaze, unwilling to intervene in the brewing storm. Ebony's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady, a practiced shield against provocation. "They're aligned, Miss Hannah. I'll double-check." She stepped to the nearest table, her fingers brushing the silk lightly, though she knew it was flawless. Hannah's heels clicked closer, her presence a gathering thundercloud. "You'd better," she snapped, her tone laced with menace. "And don't step so close when you work near me. Your apron's filthy. Keep your distance." Hannah's lips pursed, sensing the undercurrent of defiance but unable to pin it down precisely. She turned abruptly, her heels echoing like gunfire as she departed, leaving Ebony to exhale slowly, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she resumed her work. The hall continued its buzz, workers hauling chairs, a violinist tuning strings in the distance. But Ebony felt isolated, a warrior trapped in a gilded cage. She pondered Thomas again, his quiet observation during the first clash. His eyes had held something indefinable, discomfort, perhaps pity, but she dared not trust it. Men like him, polished by privilege, seldom crossed the invisible lines drawn by families like the Sinclairs. Yet his lingering presence planted a seed of question in her mind, a subtle shift in the air that hinted at storms yet to come. As she moved to the next table, her fingers deft despite the weight pressing on her chest, Ebony clung to her inner fire. The Sinclair's wealth was a currency of power, and she was merely a coin they spent freely. But today's demands had stirred something irrevocable inside her, not just about proximity, but about her very existence, her blackness, her refusal to bow. She had stayed for her sister, for the paycheck, but how much longer could she bend without breaking? The piano's notes grew louder, a prelude to the evening's engagement party, where Hannah would shine and Ebony would fade into the background. But fading was not surrender. Once more her mother's words echoed like a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "Don't let them trample your dignity." Tomorrow's wedding would test her limits, Hannah's escalating demands, Victoria's scrutiny, the Sinclair world closing in. and deep down, Ebony sensed it would be unlike any day before. Ebony clenched her jaw, the muscles tightening like coiled springs beneath her smooth skin, but her voice emerged steady, a fortress against the onslaught. "They're aligned, Miss Hannah. I'll double-check." She stepped toward the nearest table, her fingers gliding over the silk with feigned scrutiny, though she knew every fold was impeccable, a testament to her unerring precision honed over years of invisibility. The air between them crackled with unspoken challenge, Hannah's heels echoing closer like the approach of an impending storm, her presence suffusing the hall with a palpable menace. "You'd better," Hannah snapped, her words a venomous hiss that carried to the ears of nearby workers who busied themselves with exaggerated focus to avoid the crossfire. "And don't step so close when you work near me. Your apron's filthy. Keep your distance." The insult struck like a deliberate blow, heavy with layers of implication, echoing the raw demand to kneel from earlier that day. Ebony's pulse surged, a torrent of heat rising in her veins as her mind replayed the scene, the bride's imperious command, her own unyielding refusal. "I work for you, not as your slave." She lifted her gaze to meet Hannah's, holding it for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed, a silent declaration of war veiled in civility. "I'll keep that in mind, Miss Hannah," she replied, her tone cool and measured, but laced with an edge of steel that glinted like a hidden blade. Hannah's lips pursed into a thin line, her blue eyes flickering with the detection of that subtle defiance, yet unable to seize it fully. She whirled away, her heels clacking like gunfire, retreating across the marble, leaving a wake of tension that lingered in the opulent space. Ebony exhaled slowly, her hands trembling faintly as she smoothed another sash, the fabric yielding under her touch like a reluctant ally. The grand hall thrummed with activity, workers hauling ornate chairs into position, a violinist in the corner tuning strings with meticulous care. But to Ebony, it felt like a solitary battlefield, a gilded cage where she stood as a lone warrior, her armor forged from quiet endurance. She thought of Thomas then, Hannah's fiancé, his silent vigil during the initial confrontation. His hazel eyes had held something inscrutable. Discomfort, perhaps a flicker of pity, but Ebony dismissed it with a mental shake. Men like him, sculpted by privilege and polished by wealth, rarely bridged the chasms carved by families such as the Sinclairs. They navigated the world with effortless grace, blind to the undercurrents that drowned others. Yet his lingering presence nagged at her, a question mark etched into her thoughts, hinting at fractures in the facade of their perfect union. Moving to the next table, Ebony's fingers worked with deft efficiency, defying the heaviness settling in her chest like lead. The Sinclair's fortune was a currency of unbridled power, and she was merely a coin they flipped without thought, expendable in their grand designs. 10 years she had weathered their tempests, the sharp barbs from Victoria, Hannah's escalating cruelty that grew bolder with each passing season. But today's command to kneel had shifted the sands beneath her feet, transforming mere proximity into a symbol of deeper affronts. Her existence, her blackness, her refusal to crumble under the weight of their expectations. She had remained for her sister's sake, channeling every paycheck into that distant college dream, a tether that bound her tighter than any chain. But how much longer could she bend, her spine curving under the strain without snapping entirely? A soft voice pierced her reverie, pulling her back from the abyss of introspection. "You okay, Ebony?" Sasha, the young server with wide, earnest eyes and a braid swinging like a pendulum, stood nearby, clutching a tray of crystal glasses. Ebony forced a smile, masking the storm raging within, the whirlpool of anger and resolve threatening to pull her under. "Just keeping up, Sasha. How's the kitchen?" Sasha leaned in closer, her whisper conspiratorial amid the hall's hum. "Mrs. Victoria's on a rampage. Watch yourself. She's got it out for you today." Ebony nodded, her smile fading like mist in sunlight, the weight of Victoria's ire a familiar shadow that loomed larger over her than anyone else. She returned to the sashes, each precise fold an act of muted rebellion, each breath a vow whispered to herself. The piano's notes swelled louder now, a melodic harbinger of the evening's engagement party, where Hannah would dazzle under the chandeliers, her radiance eclipsing all, while Ebony retreated to the peripheries, a shadow among the splendor. But retreat was not capitulation. It was strategy, a gathering of strength for the battles ahead. Her mother's words resurfaced once more, a solitary spark piercing the gloom. Don't let them trample your dignity. Tomorrow's wedding loomed as a gauntlet, Hannah's relentless demands, Victoria's piercing scrutiny, the Sinclair empire constricting like a vice. An intuition whispered that it would be a day unlike any other, fraught with unforeseen reckonings. As the afternoon waned, Ebony glided through the grand hall of the Sinclair mansion, her black and white uniform a stark contrast to the kaleidoscope of silk gowns and tailored suits swirling in elegant chaos. The engagement party bloomed in full splendor, chandeliers casting a golden haze over guests whose laughter tinkled like clinking crystal. A symphony of Atlanta's elite indulging in excess. Her silver tray, laden with champagne flutes bubbling like captured stars, trembled subtly in her grasp, not from the weight, but from the lingering echo of Hannah's morning venom. The command to kneel a raw scar etched into her spirit. Ebony's sharp eyes scanned the throng, ever vigilant for Hannah's crimson silhouette, a beacon of potential peril amid the sea of finery. The bride-to-be's earlier warning, "Don't step so close," had drawn an invisible boundary in the sand, one Ebony had already transgressed with her refusal to bow. Now the atmosphere crackled with the promise of retribution, a subtle electricity that set her nerves alight. She navigated toward the buffet table, where caviar gleamed like dark jewels on beds of ice, her path careful and deliberate. As she passed a knot of guests engrossed in lively debate, a flash of red caught her periphery. Hannah, radiant in her silk gown, holding court among her circle of admirers, her laughter a brittle chime that masked deeper fissures. Ebony's pulse quickened, a drumbeat of caution, but she maintained her trajectory, resolute in her determination to remain unobtrusive, a shadow weaving through the light. But Hannah sensed her approach like a predator detecting prey, her head snapping around with predatory precision, blue eyes locking onto Ebony with the intensity of a hawk zeroing in on its quarry. With a deliberate flick of her wrist, calculated, almost theatrical, Hannah's champagne flute tipped precariously, golden liquid cascading onto the marble floor mere inches from Ebony's polished shoes, splattering like accusations in the glittering light. "Ebony!" Hannah's voice cleaved through the violin's melody, sharp and commanding, halting nearby conversations mid-sentence as heads turned in unison. "You stepped too close again. Look at this mess." The words were a performance, her lips curling into a cruel, triumphant smile. The spill no accident but an engineered trap sprung in front of an audience of Atlanta's finest. The guests shifted, their eyes darting between the radiant bride-to-be and the composed maid, whispers budding like weeds in fertile soil. Ebony's chest constricted, a vice of indignation squeezing her lungs, but she clung to her tray like a lifeline, the cool metal grounding her amid the rising tide of humiliation. "I'm sorry, Miss Hannah," she said, her voice calm yet firm, bending only to set the tray down with deliberate care. "I'll clean it right away." The apology was mechanical, a concession to duty rather than defeat, her mind flashing to her mother's enduring mantra, a shield against the storm. "Don't let them trample your dignity." Hannah advanced, her heels clicking like an ominous countdown, closing the distance until her perfume, jasmine laced with something sharper, enveloped Ebony like a suffocating cloud. "Sorry isn't enough," she hissed, her volume pitched perfectly for the encircling onlookers, transforming the moment into a spectacle. "You've dirtied my night. Kneel and apologize properly, or do you think you're above it?" The word kneel hung in the air like a blade, slicing through Ebony's resolve, evoking the morning's venomous echo. It was more than a command. It was an assertion of power, a reminder of hierarchies etched in skin and status, demanding submission in this hall of excess, where champagne flowed like rivers and dignity was a commodity for the privileged. Ebony's heart hammered, a war drum echoing her inner turmoil, but she straightened her spine, meeting Hannah's gaze with unflinching poise. The fire in her dark eyes burned brighter, fueled by a decade of swallowed slights, of being reduced to a shadow in her own life. "I've apologized, Miss Hannah," she stated, her tone unyielding, each syllable a brick in her wall of resistance. A murmur rippled through the spectators, some chuckling with discomfort, others shifting uneasily, the air thickening with the weight of unspoken judgments. Hannah's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing to slits of fury, the mask of composure cracking under the pressure of Ebony's quiet defiance. "Enough," she mocked, her voice rising in pitch. "You're a maid, Ebony. Know your place." The insult landed like a physical slap, but Ebony held her ground, her silence a formidable shield, more potent than any outburst. She knelt only to wipe the spill, her movements methodical and unhurried, every swipe of the cloth a deliberate act of rebellion, transforming the menial task into a statement of sovereignty. As she rose, fluid and unbroken, a figure emerged from the periphery of the crowd. Thomas Whitaker, his immaculate vest slightly rumpled from the evening's revelry, his expression clouded with a storm of his own. "Ebony, are you all right?" Thomas's voice cut through the violin's swell, low and almost swallowed by the music, yet carrying a gravity that stilled the immediate vicinity. Ebony glanced at him, surprise flickering in her eyes at the genuine concern etched in his hazel gaze, a rare crack in the polished veneer of his world. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. Trust a luxury she couldn't afford to extend lightly. Not yet, not to someone ensconced in the very privilege that oppressed her. Thomas's eyes flicked to Hannah, who let out a brittle laugh, waving a dismissive hand as if to scatter the tension like smoke. "Thomas, don't fuss over her," she chided, her tone laced with forced lightness. "She's just clumsy." But Thomas didn't smile, his features hardening as he turned to his fiancée. "She apologized, Hannah," he said, his voice measured but edged with an undercurrent of steel, a hint of fracture in their harmonious facade. "Let it go." The words hung heavy, a subtle rift in the polished tapestry of their engagement, the first visible thread pulling loose. Hannah's lips parted in astonishment, but no retort followed. Instead, she turned back to her friends with a flick of her hair, dismissing Ebony as one might swat a fly, though the tension lingered, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. Ebony retrieved her tray, retreating to the kitchen's dim sanctuary, her hands shaking as she set it down, the flutes clinking softly like echoes of the confrontation. Her thoughts drifted to the sketches hidden in her modest apartment. Designs for rooms brimming with warmth and freedom, spaces where no one was diminished by another's gaze. This mansion, with its crystal chandeliers and marble expanses, was a cage of illusions, Hannah's cruelty the lock that kept it sealed. But Thomas's intervention, brief and unexpected, planted a seed of curiosity. Why had he spoken for her? Was it fleeting pity or something deeper stirring beneath his privileged exterior? She pushed the notion aside, unwilling to nurture false hope. Men like Thomas seldom challenge the foundations of their world. The violin's notes filtered in from the hall, a reminder of the night's unrelenting demands. Ebony straightened, smoothing her uniform with resolve, the fabric a second skin of endurance. The engagement party raged on, a whirlwind of laughter and luxury, but for her it was a gauntlet navigated with head held high, her inner fire unquenched. Hannah's wrath simmered, Victoria's scrutiny loomed in the shadows, and the Sinclair domain pressed in like closing walls. Yet Ebony knew one unassailable truth. She would not kneel, not tonight, not ever, as the evening's shadows lengthened, pregnant with the promise of greater tempests ahead. Dawn's first light pierced the Sinclair mansion's towering windows, casting elongated shadows across the marble floors, like accusatory fingers pointing toward unspoken sins. Ebony Hayes moved with relentless precision through the haze of early morning, the sting of last night's public humiliation at the engagement party, a persistent bruise on her spirit. Hannah's demand to kneel an open wound that refused to scab. Yet her hands remained steady as she arranged chairs in the lush garden, each placement a silent affirmation of her unyielding resolve. At 32, she had mastered the art of burying hurt beneath layers of duty, but the fire in her chest roared hotter now, stoked by the memory of her own defiant words echoing through the opulent hall. "I work for you, not as your slave." The wedding day had dawned, and the air hummed with the electric promise of reckoning, a day where lines drawn in sand could harden into unbreakable barriers. The garden pulsed with frenetic activity, florists weaving fragrant roses into majestic arches, caterers hauling gleaming silver trays that caught the rising sun's glint, a violinist testing notes that floated like fragile hopes on the breeze. Ebony's checklist served as her lifeline. Align chairs, polish tables, inspect flowers. Her black uniform clung crisply to her frame despite the encroaching summer heat, her dark eyes scanning for any flaw the Sinclairs might seize upon, like predators spotting weakness. She passed Sasha, the young server whose wide eyes held a mix of admiration and worry, whispering urgently, "Mrs. Victoria's watching you like a hawk today." Ebony nodded, her jaw setting firm. "Let her watch," she murmured, her voice low but laced with ironclad determination. She had weathered Hannah's venom the night before. Victoria's scrutiny was merely another gale in the storm. Entering the grand hall where tables gleamed under her earlier, meticulous touch, Ebony adjusted a centerpiece of pristine white roses, their petals unfurling like secrets waiting to bloom. Victoria Sinclair swept in like a harbinger of judgment, her beige linen dress rustling with authoritative menace, gray eyes raking the room before landing on a single misaligned spoon like a hawk descending on prey. "Ebony," she intoned, her voice a honed blade slicing the air. "This is my daughter's wedding, not some back-alley diner. Fix it." Ebony's fingers moved instantly, realigning the utensil with surgical accuracy. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her tone even and controlled, though her pulse thrummed with a suppressed fury that threatened to erupt. Victoria lingered, her gaze a heavy mantle pressing down. "You're lucky to have this job," she added, the words a familiar jab sharpened by the night's lingering echoes. Ebony held Victoria's stare for a moment too long, a subtle challenge flickering in her eyes before turning back to her work, her silence a shield forged in the fires of endurance. She pondered her hidden sketches then, tucked away in her modest apartment, blueprints for spaces alive with warmth, where no soul was made to feel small. This mansion, with its cold marble and towering wealth, was a prison of illusions, and she was weary of its bars. But the paycheck, the lifeline to her sister's tuition, kept her chained, a bond she couldn't yet sever without consequence. As she carried a stack of linen napkins toward the bridal suite, Hannah's voice echoed from the hallway, sharp and impatient as a cracking whip. "Ebony, bring my dress now." Ebony's stomach knotted, a coil of dread twisting tight, but she complied, lifting the gown's delicate lace with reverent care, its fabric whispering promises of purity it belied. The hallway narrowed like a funnel of fate, gilded mirrors reflecting Hannah's approaching figure in multiplied menace. Ebony stepped aside to grant passage, but Hannah veered closer with deliberate malice, brushing the dress against the wall in a calculated graze. The lace snagged, dragging across the floor in a feigned mishap, and Hannah spun on her heel, eyes blazing like twin infernos. "You stepped too close," she snapped, her voice amplified to draw the attention of lingering staff. "Look at this. My dress is filthy. Kneel and apologize, Ebony, or you're done." The demand hung like a guillotine blade, the air thick with the stares of onlookers, their breaths held in collective anticipation. Ebony's heart pounded, a thunderous cadence in her ears, her hands gripping the gown's hem as if it were an anchor in turbulent seas. She conjured Thomas in her mind's eye, his quiet intervention from the party, a fleeting shield, but he was absent now, leaving this battle hers alone. "I'm sorry the dress touched the wall, Miss Hannah," she said, her voice steady as forged steel, each word a deliberate stone in her foundation. "I'll have it cleaned, but I won't kneel." The refusal ignited a gasp from a nearby maid, the sound rippling like a spark through dry tinder. Hannah's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling with unbridled rage. "You think you're above me?" she hissed, stepping invasively close, her perfume a cloying assault. Ebony stood tall, her eyes locked on Hannah's with unflinching intensity. "I'm doing my job," she asserted. "That's enough." The declaration drew a line in the invisible sand, a vow she would not cross, no matter the cost. Victoria materialized from the shadows, drawn by the commotion like a moth to flame, her voice ice-cold and unyielding. "Ebony, kneel and apologize, or you're out of this house by noon." The threat boomed like thunder, a decree from on high, but Ebony's resolve was ironclad, unbent by the gale. "I've apologized," she countered, her voice unwavering, refusing to flinch even as a tray clattered from a startled maid's hands, the echo amplifying the standoff. Hannah's laugh rang brittle, a facade cracking under strain, her eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty amid the fury. "You'll regret this," she spat, turning away with a sweep of her gown that trailed like a defeated banner. Victoria's stare lingered longer, a silent promise of peril more dangerous than any spoken word. Ebony felt the crushing weight of their power, the paycheck she desperately needed, the sister she supported with every grueling hour. But she also sensed the inferno within, the truth from the previous night resounding in her soul. She was no slave, and she would not bow. Returning to the garden, her hands steady as she adjusted a final chair, the violin's notes swelling louder like a battle hymn calling warriors to arms. Sasha slipped beside her, whispering with hushed reverence, "You're braver than all of us." Ebony's lips curved in a faint smile, masking the undercurrent of fear that gnawed at her edges. "Just doing what's right," she replied, though her heart raced like a captive bird. The wedding hours away, the Sinclair's wrath gathered force like storm clouds on the horizon. She thought of Thomas, his unexpected kindness from the party, wondering if he had witnessed her stand now. Would he intervene again, or was his sympathy an ephemeral whisper? Ebony glanced at the rose arch, its petals trembling in the gentle breeze, the mansion's grandeur looming behind like a fortress of cruelty and excess. She was but one woman, one flickering spark, yet she felt the fire swelling within, a blaze no Sinclair could extinguish. Today would test her mettle, Hannah's vengeance, Victoria's threats, the gravity of her choices, and as the sun climbed higher, casting warmth on her resolute face, she knew one indelible truth. She would face it all standing, her dignity an eternal flame. Ebony Hayes's footsteps echoed softly in the Sinclair mansion's bridal suite, each one a pulse of defiance against the morning's hallway clash, where Hannah's demand to kneel had nearly shattered her unyielding resolve. The room was a sanctuary of lavish indulgence, mirrors reflecting cascades of white roses in endless multiplicity, the air heavy with the bride's jasmine perfume that clung like an oppressive veil. But to Ebony, it was a battlefield cloaked in elegance, a space where power dynamics played out in whispers and glares. She carried a velvet box containing Hannah's veil, her hands steady despite the inferno raging in her chest. At 32, she had faced the Sinclair's scorn for years, but today's confrontation, "I won't kneel," had drawn a line in the marble, one she refused to erase, no matter the toll on her fragile existence. The suite buzzed with the chatter of bridesmaids, their silk dresses rustling like conspiratorial winds as they fussed over Hannah, who stood before a full-length mirror, her wedding gown a shimmering cascade of lace that flowed like a river of false purity. Ebony set the veil box on a nearby table, her movements precise and economical, her eyes deliberately avoiding the bride's reflection to evade the pull of those piercing blue orbs. She felt Victoria's threat hanging like a noose. "Out by noon." But her mother's words, a faint echo from years past in that humble kitchen, held her upright. "Don't let them trample your dignity." She was here to fulfill her duties, not to genuflect before cruelty. "Ebony." Hannah's voice cut through the bridesmaid's prattle like a sharpened blade, turning from the mirror with a predatory grace, her blue eyes glinting with malice that seemed to feed on the room's opulence. "You still haven't learned, have you? You disrespected me in that hallway." The bridesmaids fell silent, their gazes darting between the two women like spectators at a gladiatorial bout, the air thickening with anticipation. Ebony's pulse quickened, a rhythmic thunder in her ears, but she stood tall, her voice emerging calm and composed. "I apologize for upsetting you, Miss Hannah," she said, each word a deliberate anchor. "I'll ensure the veil is perfect for your day." Hannah stepped closer, her gown swishing like an approaching tempest, the lace whispering threats against the floor. An apology isn't enough, she snapped, her voice amplified for the captive audience, transforming the suite into a theater of humiliation. This is my wedding and you'll show respect. Kneel, Ebony, and beg forgiveness right now. The word kneel cracked like a whip through the room, a command laced with entitlement that echoed the morning's venom, demanding not just submission but erasure. A bridesmaid gasped softly. Another averted her eyes, but Ebony's locked onto Hannah's, unflinching and fierce. I'm sorry if I upset you, she repeated, her tone steady as a rooted oak, each syllable a bulwark. But I work for you, not as your slave. I won't kneel. The air turned electric, the silence deafening as if the room itself held its breath, the mirrors amplifying the standoff in infinite reflections. Hannah's face flushed a deep crimson, her lips trembling with a rage that twisted her beauty into something grotesque. How dare you? She shrieked, stepping forward with explosive fury, her hand rising in a flash of white-hot anger. The slap landed hard across Ebony's cheek, the sound reverberating like a gunshot, pain searing through her skin like fire on dry tinder. But Ebony didn't flinch, her eyes blazing with an undimmed fire, refusing to be extinguished by the blow. The bridesmaids froze in place, one clutching her necklace like a talisman, another stepping back in wide-eyed horror, their silence a cowardly complicity. The door swung open with a forceful creak, and Thomas Whitaker strode in, his vest slightly askew from hurried steps, his face taut with urgency born of overhearing the escalating voices. He had come to check on Hannah, perhaps to share a tender moment before the ceremony, but his hazel eyes widened at the scene. Ebony's cheek reddening vividly, standing defiant, Hannah trembling with unchecked fury. Hannah, stop! Thomas's voice thundered through the tension, a clap of authority that shattered the stasis. He positioned himself between them, his broad frame a sudden shield, his presence altering the room's gravity. She apologized, he said, his tone low but fierce, laced with a steel that surprised even him. What more do you want? Hannah's eyes widened in disbelief, her voice shaking as the gown quivered around her. Thomas, she's insolent. She disrespected me on our day. Thomas's gaze didn't waver, his hazel eyes locking onto hers with unyielding resolve. No, Hannah, he countered, his voice hardening like forged iron. You're humiliating her for no reason. She's a person, not your property. The words hung heavy, a profound fracture in the polished veneer of their engagement, exposing the rot beneath the romance. Hannah's laugh erupted brittle and desperate, an attempt to reclaim control amid the crumbling facade. Thomas, you're ruining everything, she cried, her voice cracking like fragile glass. Thomas shook his head, his expression inscrutable, a mask of finality. If this is who you are, Hannah, I've misjudged you. He turned on his heel, striding out with purposeful steps, leaving the suite in stunned silence, the door closing with a definitive thud that echoed like a verdict. The bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, one muttering under her breath, but Hannah stood frozen, her gown pooling around her like a mockery of bridal triumph. Ebony moved to leave, her cheek pulsing with pain, her heart a tumultuous drum of pride laced with fear. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, the bridesmaids' wary glances, Hannah's seething stare, even the absent Thomas's lingering impact. She had held her ground, but the cost loomed like gathering shadows. Sasha's earlier warning from the garden reverberated. Mrs. Victoria's watching. Victoria's threat was no longer a distant rumble, but an imminent certainty, a storm front closing in. Yet as Ebony stepped into the hallway, the cool air a balm on her heated skin, she felt the fire within surge stronger, an unquenchable blaze. The violin's notes swelled from outside, signaling the ceremony's approach, but to her they sounded like a call to arms. She thought of her sketches, her dream of crafting spaces where no one was diminished, Hannah's slap and Victoria's threats mere chains she refused to wear. Thomas's stand had been a shock, a fissure in the Sinclair armor, but Ebony didn't dare pin her hopes on it for salvation. She was her own redeemer, her dignity a flame that burned brighter with every stride. The wedding beckoned, a gauntlet of wrath and uncertainty, but she would face it as always, standing tall, unbroken. Ebony haze lingered at the garden's edge, The Sinclair mansion's rose arches casting elongated shadows across her path, like fractured promises of forever. The sting of Hannah's slap still burned her cheek, a searing emblem of the bridal suite's explosive confrontation, but Thomas's words echoed louder, a resonant shield. She's a person, not your property. The wedding ceremony had commenced, the air thick with the intoxicating scent of blooming roses and the violin's mournful rendition of Canon in D, its notes weaving through the summer warmth like threads of fragile destiny. Ebony's black uniform adhered to her skin in the rising heat, her checklist forgotten in her pocket, a relic of routines now overshadowed by the day's seismic shifts. At 32, she had confronted the Sinclair's cruelty before, but today felt like a precipice, a breaking point where her refusal to kneel could unravel the meticulously woven tapestry of their world. Guests filled the white chairs in orderly rows, their silk dresses and tailored suits, a vibrant mosaic of wealth under the golden sun, murmuring in anticipation as the officiant prepared to invoke eternal vows. Ebony positioned herself near the back, her eyes sweeping the assembly, half expecting Victoria's wrath to descend like a vengeful specter. She had been commanded to leave by noon, her job dangling by a threadbare strand, yet she couldn't depart. Not yet. The fire in her chest, kindled by years of swallowed indignities, demanded she witness the fallout, a silent testament to her endurance. She thought of her sketches, dreams of designing spaces where no one was compelled to bow, that vision now closer, propelled by her defiance and Thomas's unforeseen alliance. On the rose-draped altar, Hannah stood radiant, her lace gown shimmering like a mirage of innocence, her smile a brittle mask that concealed the morning's fissures, her eyes darting nervously to Thomas beside her, his face a study in restrained turmoil. The officiant's voice droned on, invoking love and commitment, but Ebony sensed the undercurrent of discord, a fracture lurking beneath the ceremony's glossy surface. Guests whispered, their glances occasionally flickering toward her, the maid who had dared to stand tall, her presence a subtle undercurrent in the sea of privilege. She caught Sasha's eye across the garden, the young server nodding in silent solidarity, her tray abandoned amid the unfolding drama. Thomas stepped forward to the microphone, his breath amplified in the hushed expectancy, the crowd falling silent as they awaited vows of devotion. But his voice emerged steady, slicing through the violin's strains like a blade through silk. "I need to say something," he declared, his gaze locking onto Hannah with unyielding intensity. "Today I saw you demand Ebony kneel for a mistake she'd already apologized for. You struck her, Hannah, because she wouldn't bow. I can't marry someone who treats another human being like that. Not because of her job, not because of her skin." The words detonated like thunder, rippling through the guests in a shockwave of gasps and widened eyes, the air suddenly charged with scandal's electric hum. Hannah's face drained of color, her bouquet trembling in her grip as the gown quivered around her like a wilting flower. "Thomas, you're making a scene," she hissed into the microphone, her voice cracking with desperation, the facade of bridal bliss shattering. "She was disrespectful. This is our day." Thomas shook his head, his hazel eyes resolute, unflinching in the face of her plea. "No, Hannah, it's not about disrespect. It's about cruelty. I thought I knew you, but I was wrong." He turned to the officiant, his voice firm and final. "This wedding is off." Ebony's heart pounded, a tumultuous rhythm of vindication and vertigo. She hadn't sought this cataclysm, hadn't willed the wedding's collapse, but Thomas's proclamation was a mirror to her fire, reflecting the injustices she had endured. Guests began to rise, some whispering in hushed tones, others grabbing purses with hurried motions, their exodus a slow unraveling of the Sinclair's grandeur. A woman in a sapphire dress muttered, "That maid caused all this." But another countered sharply, "No, the Sinclairs did. They went too far." Ebony stood rooted, her cheeks still throbbing, but her spine was iron, her dignity intact amid the whirlwind. Hannah's sobs broke the air, raw and desperate, as she sank onto the altar steps, her gown pooling like spilled moonlight in defeat. Victoria attempted to rally the crowd, her voice frantic and pleading. "Please stay. We'll fix this." But the guests streamed toward the parking lot, their chatter a chorus of scandal that would echo through Atlanta's elite circles for weeks. Ebony felt their eyes upon her, curious, accusing, admiring, but she met them with a steady gaze, unbowed. She had lost her job, her lifeline severed in the chaos, but she had preserved something infinitely greater, herself. Sasha slipped beside her, whispering with awe-tinged breath, "You did this, Ebony. You stood up, and now look." Ebony shook her head, her voice soft, yet infused with quiet pride. "I just didn't kneel, Sasha. Thomas did the rest." But her words carried a newfound strength, a spark that hadn't existed before. The garden, once a stage for celebration, transformed into a graveyard of ambitions, the violin falling silent, its melody replaced by the crunch of gravel under departing feet. Ebony turned toward the mansion's gate, her steps deliberate and unhurried, the sun warming her face like a benediction. She thought of her sketches, her aspiration for a life beyond these confining walls. Thomas's stand a shocking breach in the Sinclair's impenetrable fortress. But she didn't dare assume it would shield her from Victoria's impending wrath. The future stretched uncertain, fraught with unknowns. Yet as she walked, her uniform no longer a chain but a mere garment to shed, she felt a profound truth settle in her bones. She would never kneel again. The storm had broken, and she emerged ready for whatever lay beyond. Her spirit unbroken, her fire eternal. A week had slipped by like shadows retreating from dawn. The Sinclair wedding's spectacular collapse still reverberating through Atlanta's whispered corridors of power and privilege. Ebony Hayes sat at the worn wooden table in her modest Atlanta apartment, the morning sun spilling golden hues across the small kitchen, illuminating a chipped mug of coffee whose steam curled upward like whispers of untapped potential. The echoes of Thomas's altar-shattering declaration, "I can't marry someone who treats another human being like that," lingered in her mind, a vindication she hadn't dared to envision. At 32, Ebony had lost her job, the lifeline that sustained her through a decade of quiet endurance, but the fire in her chest, ignited by her refusal to kneel, burned brighter than ever, a beacon cutting through the fog of uncertainty that shrouded her future. The apartment was a humble haven, its walls adorned with thrift store art that spoke of resilience and hidden beauty. But one corner held her true treasure, a stack of sketches, designs for rooms that breathe warmth and liberation, spaces where light danced freely without casting shadows of diminishment. Ebony's fingers traced the lines of a cozy lounge drawing, her dream of interior design now a faint pulse of hope amid the wreckage. The Sinclair's cruelty, Hannah's stinging slap, Victoria's venomous threats, had exacted a heavy toll, but standing tall had bestowed something priceless, her unyielding self. She sipped her coffee, its bitterness a grounding force, as her phone buzzed with a message from Sasha. "You're the talk of the town." Ebony's lips curved in a mix of pride and unease. She hadn't intended to topple a wedding, but the ripples of that day were spreading like cracks in fine china. Sasha arrived soon after, her knock sharp against the thin door, bursting in with wide eyes and a swinging braid, her energy a whirlwind in the quiet space. "Ebony, you should hear it out there," she said, her voice laced with excitement as she stepped inside. "Guests from the wedding are telling everyone how you stood up to Hannah, how Thomas walked away. The Sinclairs are losing contracts left and right, their empire's crumbling." Ebony leaned back, the mug warm in her hands, an anchor against the surge of emotions. "I just didn't kneel, Sasha," she said softly, her tone understated yet resonant. "I didn't ask for any of this." Sasha grinned, undeterred, perching on the table's edge like a conspirator. "Maybe not, but you started something. Folks are saying the Sinclairs showed their true colors, treating you like that because of who you are." She paused, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "You gave us courage, you know. Me, the other staff, we're proud of you." Ebony's throat tightened, her eyes drifting to her sketches, the lines suddenly sharper in the sunlight. For 10 years she had been invisible in the Sinclair mansion, a ghost sustaining their illusions of grandeur. But now her defiance had rendered her visible, not merely as a maid, but as a woman who had sparked unforeseen change. Her phone chimed again. An email from Clara Evans, owner of a prestigious Atlanta interior design firm. I heard about your stand at the Sinclair wedding, it read. Your strength is remarkable. We need someone like you on our team. Would you consider a role as a design assistant? Ebony's breath caught, her heart racing as if sprinting toward a horizon long obscured. The words were a lifeline, a bridge from the ashes of her old life to the dream she had buried under layers of drudgery. She read the email twice, her fingers trembling slightly, the sketches on her table blooming with vivid possibility. But the moment was fractured with another notification, a call from Victoria Sinclair, her name flashing on the screen like a dark omen. Ebony's stomach knotted, a familiar dread coiling tight, but she answered, her voice emerging steady as tempered steel. Ebony, you've ruined us, Victoria spat, her tone laced with venom that dripped through the line. Our reputation, our deals, all because of your insolence. I'll sue you for destroying my daughter's wedding. Ebony's grip tightened on the phone, the phantom sting of Hannah's slap resurfacing on her cheek like a ghost touch. Mrs. Sinclair, she replied, her words forged in unshakable resolve. The truth doesn't need my defense. You and Hannah broke your own world. She hung up, her pulse thundering like a victorious drum, a rush of liberation washing over her, cleansing the remnants of fear. She rose, pacing to the window where children's laughter floated up from the street below, a reminder of life thriving beyond the Sinclair's suffocating shadow. Victoria's threat was tangible, a storm cloud on the horizon, but Ebony felt unshackled, her apprehensions supplanted by a fire she hadn't fully known she possessed. She thought of Thomas, his bold stand at the ceremony, and checked her email once more. A new message from him awaited. Ebony, I'm sorry for what you endured. Your courage showed me who the Sinclairs are. If you need help finding work, I'm here. Her fingers hovered over the reply, gratitude mingling with fierce independence. Thank you, she typed, but I'll stand on my own. She hit send, her heart lighter yet firm, a declaration of self-reliance. Sasha, still lingering with watchful awe, observed her transformation. You're really something, Ebony, she said. What's next? Ebony glanced at her sketches, the lounge design glowing in the sunlight like a prophecy. I'm thinking bigger, she replied, her voice soft but certain, infused with a newfound authority. Maybe a place of my own one day, where no one's made to feel small. Sasha's eyes lit up, sparkling with shared vision. I'd work for you in a heartbeat, she declared, and Ebony laughed, the sound a rare release, echoing through the apartment like a harbinger of renewal. The space felt alive now, its walls no longer confining, but a canvas for her unfolding future. The Sinclair's empire was fracturing, their cruelty exposed by whispers that spread like wildfire through social circles and beyond. Ebony didn't know if Victoria's threat would materialize into legal tempests, but she knew one unassailable truth. She would never bow again. Clara's offer was a door cracked open, her sketches a map to navigate, Sasha's faith a spark to ignite the path. She thought of the wedding garden, the roses that had borne witness to her unyielding stand, and felt a profound truth root deep in her bones. She was no longer their maid. She was Ebony Hayes, and her fire would illuminate the way forward. 2 months later, the Atlanta sun streamed through the glass walls of Clara Evans's design studio, bathing Ebony's desk in a glow that felt like unbridled freedom. The Sinclair wedding's implosion had faded to echoes, but Ebony's refusal to kneel had sparked a fire that still blazed in her chest. Now at 32, she sat sketching a modern dining room, her pencil dancing across the paper, with a confidence she hadn't known in the mansion's oppressive shadows. Her crisp white blouse had replaced the maid's uniform, her posture no longer braced for slights, but open to creation's embrace. The hum of innovation surrounded her, colleagues debating color swatches, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the crisp aroma of drafting paper, replacing Hannah's venom with the symphony of possibility. Ebony adjusted a line on her sketch, envisioning warm oak tables under soft lighting, her talent wielded like a weapon of empowerment. Clara's offer had been her salvation, pulling her from the ruins of lost employment into a realm where her eye for detail, sharpened by years of perfecting Sinclair tables, now crafted welcoming havens rather than bastions of exclusion. She glanced at a framed photo on her desk, a sketch of a cozy lounge from her apartment days, a reminder of the studio she dreamed of owning, her scars from Hannah's slap and Victoria's threats worn like armor, fortifying her ascent. "Ebony, your layout is stunning," Clara said, leaning over the desk, her silver hair catching the light like wisdom incarnate. "The client loved your lighting ideas. You've got a gift." Ebony's cheeks warmed, her smile genuine and unguarded. "Thank you, Miss Clara," she replied, her voice steady and laced with pride. "I'm just getting started." Clara's eyes twinkled with knowing approval. "I knew you were special when I heard about that wedding. Standing up to the Sinclairs, that's rare courage." Ebony nodded, the memory of Hannah's command, "Kneel and beg," now a distant sting, transmuted into fuel for her unquenchable fire. A tap on her shoulder drew her attention. James, a lanky designer with a familiar grin, once a server under the Sinclair's thumb, stood there, his voice low with intrigue. "You hear about Victoria? She's dodging events now. Nobody wants to deal with them after the wedding mess. Hannah's lying low, too." Ebony's brow lifted, a blend of satisfaction and detachment washing over her. "They built that cage themselves," she said coolly, her tone carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. James chuckled, leaning in conspiratorially. "You kicked it open, though. I left because of you. Couldn't stomach their nonsense anymore." His words landed softly, a testament to the spark she had ignited, rippling outward like waves from a stone cast into still waters. Ebony returned to her sketch, but her mind wandered to Sasha's visit the previous week, the young server bursting with news of a community event honoring her stand. "They're calling you the woman who didn't kneel," Sasha had said, eyes shining with admiration. The gathering at a local church had drawn dozens, former Sinclair staff, neighbors, even wedding guests who had spread her story like gospel. Ebony had spoken briefly, her voice catching with emotion. "I stood for my dignity, but you all made it mean more." The applause had been a balm, a chorus of hands lifting her higher than the Sinclairs ever could. Her computer pinged, an email from Hannah snapping her back to the present. "Ebony, I was wrong to treat you that way," it read. "I'm trying to change. Please forgive me." Ebony's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her jaw tightening as memories resurfaced. Hannah's raised hand, the venomous kneel. The words seemed sincere, but she saw the slap's echo, heard the cruelty's hiss. She closed the email without replying, her heart a tangle of anger and caution. Forgiveness might come, but only if Hannah's actions aligned with her professed remorse. James, catching her expression, raised a brow. "Trouble?" Ebony shook her head. "Just the past knocking. I'm not answering yet." The studio's energy shifted as Clara called a meeting, and Ebony joined her team, presenting her dining room design with a voice once muted by scorn, now resonant with authority, her ideas sparking nods and enthusiasm from colleagues. As she spoke, she felt the fire within expand. A vision of her own studio, Ebony's vision, taking shape, a sanctuary where every worker was valued, no one forced to bow. The dream was no longer a distant sketch, but a blueprint, each day at Clara's laying its foundation. She turned back to her sketch, her pencil moving with purposeful strokes, each line a promise to herself. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the studio, but Ebony packed her bag, her blouse a symbol of rebirth. The Sinclairs had tried to break her, but they had only forged her stronger. Hannah's apology and Victoria's threats were ghosts she had outrun, her journey a testament to resilience. As she stepped into the Atlanta evening, the city's pulse matching her own, a rhythm of hope and fire, she knew her path was just beginning. The Atlanta evening glowed through the glass walls of Ebony's design studio. Ebony Hayes's design studio, its simple sign a beacon above the bustling street, illuminating a path forged from defiance and dreams. A year had passed since the Sinclair wedding imploded in a cascade of revelations, since her refusal to kneel had set her free from their gilded cage. Now at 33, Ebony stood amid her creation, her teal dress catching the light of handmade lamps she had crafted herself. The studio's opening buzzing with life as guests admired her designs, their laughter mingling with jazz from a corner speaker. Her heart swelled, The journey from Maid to Visionary, a fire that burned brighter than ever, lighting the space she had built from the ashes of humiliation. The studio was her masterpiece, oak tables draped in linen, walls adorned with her sketches framed in gold, potted ferns softening the modern edges into welcoming curves. Each element reflected her dream, spaces where no one felt small, where dignity was the foundation, not a fragile overlay. She greeted guests with a radiant smile, no longer the guarded mask of the Sinclair mansion, but a genuine bloom of triumph. 2 months at Clara Evans' firm had taught her to harness her talent with professional finesse. A year of grit, late night sketching by lamplight, and community support had birthed this haven. She thought of Sasha's words at the church event, honoring her stand. "You're the woman who didn't kneel," and felt that truth in every purposeful step, her heels clicking like affirmations on the polished floor. "Ebony, this place is stunning," Clara said, her silver hair gleaming as she surveyed a display of Ebony's community project. A free art space for kids, walls alive with vibrant murals. "You've turned pain into beauty." Ebony's eyes softened, gratitude warming her core. "Couldn't have started without you, Miss Clara," she replied, her voice warm and resonant. She led a tour, pointing out a mural of Atlanta's skyline, its lines echoing the sketches from her cramped apartment a year ago, now transformed into bold strokes of possibility. Guests nodded, their murmurs a chorus of awe, and Ebony felt truly seen, not as a maid enduring slights, but as a creator reshaping worlds. Sasha burst through the crowd, her braids swinging, a grin splitting her face like sunlight through clouds. "You did it, Ebony!" she exclaimed, hugging her fiercely. "Half the old Sinclair staff are here. They're proud as hell." Ebony laughed, squeezing back, the embrace a bridge from past shadows to present light. James, the former server turned designer, joined them, gesturing to a client with enthusiasm. "That guy's signing with us," he said. "Your community project sold him." Ebony's chest tightened, a blend of gratitude and pride surging like a tide. These were her people, her strength, the hands that had lifted her when the Sinclairs sought to crush her spirit. A familiar figure approached through the throng. Thomas Whitaker, his suit casual yet sharp, hazel eyes warm with quiet admiration. "Ebony, this is incredible," he said, his voice carrying the same resolve that had halted the wedding. "You've built something real." She smiled, no longer wary of his kindness, the barriers of privilege eroded by time and truth. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied. "Your stand that day, it gave me space to breathe." He shook his head modestly. "You gave yourself that space. I just saw the truth." He paused, his gaze distant, reflective. "I cut ties with the Sinclairs. Now I'm working on projects that matter, helping communities, not building empires." Ebony nodded, recognizing in him a mirror of her rebirth, a shared path diverged from cruelty's grip. Whispers from Sasha had brought news of the Sinclairs' fall. Victoria, once a titan of influence, now shunned in social circles, her tech empire hemorrhaging clients as her cruelty became legend, whispered in boardrooms and galas. Hannah had joined an anti-racism group, her efforts tentative but public, a handwritten letter arriving at the studio with raw sincerity. "I'm sorry, Ebony. I'm learning to be better." Ebony hadn't responded, her heart still guarded. Hannah's slap, the venomous kneel and beg, lingered like echoes in a hollow chamber. But Ebony didn't need her remorse to thrive. Her fire required no apology to blaze onward. The crowd roared, their cheers a tide lifting her higher. Ebony feeling the fire within blaze like a supernova, a legacy of her mother's words. "Don't let them trample your dignity." She saw Sasha's grin, James's nod, Clara's pride, and knew this was her victory, not just over the Sinclairs, but over every shadow that had tried to eclipse her. Hannah's letter sat unanswered in her desk, a question for another day. Forgiveness might dawn, but Ebony's focus was here, in the light she had forged. As guests mingled, Ebony stepped to the studio's window, Atlanta's skyline twinkling beyond, like stars aligning in her favor. The city's pulse matched her own, a rhythm of resilience and hope. She touched the sign, Ebony's Visions, its letters of vow etched in her soul. The Sinclairs had tried to break her, but they had only forged her stronger. Her studio was more than a business. It was a beacon, a realm where no one would kneel. She turned back to the crowd, her heart full, her fire eternal, ready to illuminate paths for others as she had illuminated her own. Ebony Hayes's fire burned through the Sinclair's cruelty, transforming a maid's defiance into a beacon of dignity. From a slap to a studio, her journey proved no one can dim a light that refuses to fade. Will Hannah's redemption hold? Or is Ebony's silence her final word? Share your thoughts. Where are you listening? What time is it? And what's your prediction for their paths? Your support fuels these stories. So, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and keep the conversation alive. Stay bold, stay true. Until next time. Ebony Hayes's fire burned through the Sinclair's cruelty, transforming a maid's defiance into a beacon of dignity that no force could extinguish. From a humiliating slap to owning her own studio, her journey proves that standing tall can light the way for change, even against overwhelming odds. Will Hannah's attempts at redemption truly last, or is Ebony's silence the ultimate closure? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what moved you most about the story, where you're tuning in from, and what time it is there. Thank you for joining us on this inspiring tale. Your engagement fuels our passion for these narratives. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories. Hit that like button and drop a comment to keep the conversation alive. Stay bold, stay true, and we'll see you in the next one.